Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving right into the absolute behemoth that is the history of the American West. We're going to separate all that romanticized Hollywood folklore from the fascinating and sometimes really harsh historical facts. You know, the American frontier is one of the defining features of the United States national identity. But the story we've been fed through pop culture completely misses the incredible reality of how this massive continental expansion actually went down. Real quick, here is our roadmap for today. We're covering defining the frontier, engines of expansion, the rush for wealth, displacement and Indian wars, the real Western society, and finally, the end of the frontier. Let's get right into it. So before we look at the data, I want you to just picture the quintessential symbol of the West for a second. You're probably visualizing a lone, rugged cowboy riding through some empty, lawless desert, right? Maybe a tumbleweed blows by, and there's a shootout waiting to happen at high noon. It's an incredibly powerful image, one that was heavily popularized by sensationalized media between the 1850s and the 1910s. But as it turns out, that whole cinematic archetype is a stark contrast to historical reality. The real American West wasn't just some rugged, empty wasteland. It was actually defined by rapid urbanization, massive government intervention, and highly diverse demographics. It was a bustling, complex zone of contact shaped heavily by infrastructure and structured societies. Section 1. Defining the frontier. What exactly was the West? To understand the real history, we've got to look at how the government actually tracked this territory. The U.S. Census Bureau actually had a strict mathematical definition for the frontier. They defined it as any land with fewer than 2 people per square mile. So it wasn't a static place on a map, but a constantly moving boundary. Starting with the first European settlements on the East Coast in the 1600s, this demographic line steadily pushed westward, all the way into the 1900s. Section 2. Engines of expansion. Let's talk about the massive forces actually driving this push westward. The crucial point here is that this expansion wasn't just driven by rugged individualism, it was fueled by colossal government initiatives. Just look at the sheer scale of the 1803 Louisiana Purchase. President Thomas Jefferson literally doubled the size of the nation for $15 million. When you do the math on that, it breaks down to less than 4 cents an acre. 4 cents. For the price of a modern piece of candy, they were buying entire farms. That single federal purchase created millions of new opportunities and completely set the stage for the century. And this didn't just happen overnight. It was a rapid succession of treaties, purchases, and technological leaps. You've got the Louisiana Purchase in 1803, the Texas annexation in 1845, and then the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo in 1848, which ceded 500,000 square miles from Mexico to the U.S. And by 1869, the first transcontinental railroad was finished, completely transforming a deadly 6-month wagon journey into an 8-day train ride. The federal government was literally paving the way for settlement. Speaking of paving the way, the Homestead Act of 1862 was an absolute masterclass in government-driven demographic shifts. This policy deliberately populated the plains by offering 160 acres of land entirely for free. The only catch? You just had to live on it and improve it for 5 years. And it was radically inclusive for its time, open to citizens, non-citizens, squatters, and even women. It drew thousands of adventurous folks straight to the Great Plains. Section 3. The rush for wealth. Because government policy was really only half the equation, there was a massive private profit motive at play too. To put the sheer human movement into perspective, look at this number. Roughly 400,000 men, women, and children walked the grueling 2,000-mile overland Oregon Trail. This journey typically took 6 perilous months. They faced cholera, malnutrition, exposure, but the promise of fertile farmland and precious metals was so strong that nearly 500,000 people were willing to risk absolutely everything to make that trek. And honestly, nothing motivated that migration quite like gold. Following the 1848 discovery, over 250,000 miners descended on California. They pulled over $200 million in gold out of the ground in just 5 years. San Francisco's population exploded from a tiny town of 500 to 150,000 in a few decades. What started as independent guys with pickaxes rapidly transitioned into massive, corporate-heavy mining machinery that forever changed the economy. Section 4. Displacements and Indian Wars. We absolutely have to acknowledge the severe human cost of this era, as this wave of migration inevitably collided with the Native American tribes who already lived there. Historians estimate that between 1800 and 1890, the Native American population declined drastically, dropping from roughly 600,000 to as few as 250,000. This massive depopulation was principally driven by infectious diseases brought by the settlers, which completely devastated tribes, and it was compounded heavily by decades of warfare and displacement. As the frontier line pushed west, the U.S. Army engaged in numerous conflicts against tribes attempting to defend their ancestral lands. We see major conflicts like the Great Sioux War and devastating massacres at Sand Creek and Wounded Knee. Ultimately, the federal government enforced a reservation policy that was designed specifically to dismantle tribal structures and force assimilation, which radically altered Native American societies forever. Section 5. The Real Western Society. When we look closely at who is actually living in these new settlements, the reality is way more diverse than the myths. The true demographics of the West were incredibly diverse. We see African Americans, like the exodusters migrating to Kansas, and the famed Buffalo Soldiers. Asian immigrants, especially Chinese workers, were absolutely instrumental in building the railroads. Hispanic populations established the very foundations of ranching and cowboy culture. And women were vital, not just at home, but as crucial farm managers and independent business owners who helped build these local economies from the ground up. Oh, and to shatter one more myth for you, let's talk about Dodge City. Hollywood loves a good street shootout, right? But historically, the moment Dodge City established a local government, they enacted strict municipal laws banning both concealed and open carry of firearms within city limits. Law enforcement spent way more time confiscating guns from rowdy cowboys than they ever did engaging in epic duels. The goal was simply to reduce crime and protect their businesses. Finally, Section 6, the end of the frontier. How did this massive era actually draw to a close? Well, by 1890, the superintendent of the census officially declared that the unsettled area of the West had been so broken into by isolated settlements that a true frontier line just didn't exist anymore. The open land was essentially gone. I'm going to leave you with this provocative thought from historian Frederick Jackson Turner. He said, "The frontier promoted the formation of a composite nationality for the American people." It really makes you wonder, did the frontier merely act as a geography to be conquered, or was it the very process that forged the modern American identity we know today? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the history you see on the screen.